Hello everyone, we are back. My name is Joy Jagannath. I hope everyone who is listening to this is really safe and in the best of their health. I welcome you all to the fifth episode of Sighly Hober. Let me tell you, this episode is very special to us. First, we have worked on the suggestions that you have given to us, and secondly, in this episode, we tried to create something really meaningful and helpful as well. With the sad demise of a popular actor, few days before, everyone around me tried to be a mental health ambassadors for a few days though. It's a very good thing that we want to help each other. But before we proceed with our actions, we must understand the underlying basic principles of depression and what is exactly the thing that is going on inside the head of a concerned person. So we bring you this episode to talk about mental health in detail and especially with a specialist. Coming to my personal experience, I was diagnosed with clinical depression back in 12th, and it's been a roller coaster ride dealing with the darkness that resides inside me. At times, I would desperately want to stop everything that is going on in my mind. It's like someday you wake up lazy in the morning and you don't want to go to college or office. It's exactly the same thing, but with life. It's beyond any physical pain, and all I can say is it's a very twisted form of self preservation. So, whoever is going through a tough time right now or something similar to this, let me tell you, you're not alone in this fight. We are all together in this fight against darkness. To overcome this, we of course need a source of light in the form of knowledge. Knowledge to know how our brain functions, what exactly happens in depression, and the other things. So, in this episode, you will find the light that you all need. So, without wasting any time, I would like Biswajit to say something on this.
Thank you, Sambit. So, I recently read an article on Hindustan Times, which rightly mentioned that humanity has rarely experienced such a collective sense of vulnerability, a dual threat to both mind and body. While the effects of COVID-19 on physical health have been, documented and it's been discussed on a regular basis, the unprecedented psychosocial health effects have not, gained the required attention. So we as Sighly Hober thought, why don't we take this moment and talk about the mental health aspects of this situation? So Samal,
Thank you,
go ahead.
Biswa. So today's topic is a little bit sensitive to talk. I'll just say with these lines like people normally don't talk about it openly. The refusal to openly talk about mental health has always led to the rumor that the individual who took off to cope up with that, they are being labeled as weak or something like that. So it's kind of a taboo to talk about it with your friends or family because they don't understand really what you are going through. So, with this episode, we are trying to address those kind of things like how to help someone who is suffering and how we can see. And so, in this episode, we'll be addressing those kind of things like how do you support your friends or any close person to cope up with these things. So, without much delay, I'd like Sambit to introduce our guest of tonight. And let's start. Sambit, here you go.
So, hello guys. As said before, we have got a specialist, Anuradha Palit, with us as our guest for today to talk on this issue. To brief about her, she is a licensed clinical psychologist who has been in this field since last 5 years. She is also a life skill trainer who has worked widely in government and corporate organizations. So, I welcome her to our show. So, Anuradha, can you brief us about your journey of life till now?
Thank you, Sambit, for giving me this platform and all of you for giving me this platform to talk about mental health and spread awareness among people. So thanks a lot. So to just to give a bit of a brief about my journey, particularly in this area. So I got exposed to this field quite early in my life because my father has been in a psychologist. So so I have been exposed in this area by my father, and as I grew up, I think I also developed an inclination towards this subject because I would always be intrigued by the human mind and it's the way it works. So I think after my 12th exams, I was very keen on taking up psychology, and I did my graduation and post graduation from Calcutta, and then I did my MPhil in clinical psychology from Institute of Psychiatry, which is again in Calcutta. So it's a 2 years extensive training, particularly in clinical psychology. And so I did my internships in various government hospitals and have had extensive training in seeing different kind of clients, and also had training in therapy as well. And then I think 3 years back, it's been more than 3 years now that I've shifted my base to Bangalore, and since then I have been working here. I was initially attached with the school, and there I used to take care of the mental health of the students, and also I used to conduct workshops for teachers and parents, and I used to be a life skill trainer as well. And then I think it's been more than 1 year that now I'm working as a MIND.FIT therapist with PureFit now. And yeah, so that's been pretty much my journey, Samrit.
Yes, this is so great, and we feel proud to connect with you, Anuradha. So, going with the questionnaire that we have, and we want to go ahead you to answer certain specific questions related to the topic that you're going to discuss today. So, coming to the first question, so Siddharth, can you ask?
Yeah, guys. So Anuradha, I'll just make it simple and let's break the topic into the small details.
Sure,
So,
Siddharth.
if you could start with defining the terms like anxiety, depression, panic attacks in the most basic form. What are these things, and how do you define them?
Right, right. So basically, I'll start with talking about depression a bit, because this is something that's been, probably we are all, we know about it very, we talk about it very frequently. So I think to begin with depression, first we need to understand how is it different from sadness. Because when we talk about depression nowadays, the word depression is used very colloquially. So we often say that, I'm feeling depressed, I'm just, not feeling good, and we just use the term depression very frequently. Now, the most important thing to understand here is that sadness is a normal emotion. It's a normal human emotion. And we all experience occasional sadness in life. And we experience sadness in response to various events in life, right? Now, what happens is sadness doesn't persist for too long. It is temporary in nature. So, after a while, maybe a day or two, it goes away. But if sadness tends to persist for more than 2 weeks, right, and along with that low mood, if there are other symptoms as well, which is, for example, along with low mood, symptoms can be like irritability, disturbance in sleep, decreased appetite, decreased energy, then usually people have feelings of guilt. They tend to blame themselves. They also have a lot of negative thoughts, like they perceive themselves to be worthless. They feel extremely helpless about their situation. And they also perceive the future to be hopeless. And along with that, in severe form, many people also have suicidal thoughts as well. So when these things come into the picture, along with the low mood, which usually persists for more than 2 weeks, then only we diagnose the person having clinical depression. So this is very important for us to know that depression is not usual sadness. Sadness is temporary, but depression isn't. So it requires a clinical diagnosis. So that is about depression. About anxiety, if we talk about anxiety, again, anxiety is again a very normal human emotion, right? We all experience anxiety, I think, in our life, because there are different situations in life when we feel anxious. For example, like, I think we all have given interviews in our life, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
before giving an interview, so we do feel anxious. Or let's say I have to give a speech in front of a public, so that time also we feel anxious, right? But the thing is, here again, this anxiety doesn't last longer. It is temporary in nature. But what happens is, it becomes a disorder when this anxiety lasts longer, and it starts affecting the social occupational functioning of the person, right? And during that time, what happens is, along with, when a person feels anxious, they experience a lot of other symptoms as well. For example, if the person starts feeling restless, There are, the person starts feeling uncomfortable inside the body. So the person might end up feel, there is sweating, there is increase in the heart rate, the person experiences palpitations, there's some sort of a butterfly in the stomach kind of a feeling, right? Along with this, the person also experiences a lot of negative thoughts. And with anxiety, one of the most common thought is that as if the person might not be able to manage and something bad is going to happen. So during that time, so naturally the person tends to avoid such situation. So no longer this anxiety is basically temporary, or it then starts affecting the daily functioning of the person. During that time, we say that the person is having anxiety disorder. Now again, when we talk about anxiety, I always say that anxiety is not bad because it is a survival emotion. Now, why do I say so? Because if we go back and we look into the prehistoric times, that, the early men, they used to have a lot of, they used to face a lot of real danger in the environment, right? So they had to protect themselves from the wild animals. Now, during that time, if the anxiety was something that used to prepare them to protect themselves. Hence, it is a survival emotion. Anxiety is usually is an emotion which helps us to prepare the body for either a fight response or a flight response. I think fight and flight is something we are aware about, right? But
Yeah,
what
yeah.
happens is,
Yes.
under anxiety, when the mind perceives a threat, any danger, immediately it sends a signal to the brain, and it tells the brain that that there is some danger, you need to do something. And during that time, it basically prepares the body to take an action. Now that action can be in the form of fight, where we confront the situation, or it is flight, where we basically run away or avoid the situation. So this preparation of the body in order to protect the cell from any sort of danger is very important. But what happens in anxiety disorder is that sometimes the person perceives threat or danger in the environment when there isn't any threat, actual threat or real threat. During that time, this anxiety turns into unreal anxiety, or what we can say as imagined or perceived anxiety, right? And that's where it becomes pathological. Now, I think
Okay.
you also asked me to probably explain a bit about panic disorder. Now, panic
Yeah.
disorder also comes under anxiety disorder. So, anxiety disorders can be of different kinds, Siddharth. One kind of anxiety
Okay.
disorder is panic disorder. So, in panic disorder, what happens is a person experiences recurrent panic attacks. Now, we need to understand what do I mean by, or what do we mean by panic attacks? Panic attacks is
Mhm.
nothing but where a person experiences, where there are sudden periods of intense fear that come quickly and reach the peak within minutes. Now, panic attacks
Okay.
usually are followed by a trigger. Sometimes it can also happen unexpectedly. So many a times, people experiencing panic attacks, they often worry about when the next attack will happen, right? And they try to prevent any future attacks by avoiding any place or situations that are associated with the panic attack. In a panic attack, the typical characteristics are where the person's heartbeat increases, the person experiences severe palpitations, there is breathlessness, which ends up making the person feel, experience choking sensations. And most important in a panic attack is the person experiences that, the person feels that the person is out of control, right? That the person experiences that he or she cannot control the situation. So, and that causes a lot of fear and anxiety to the person. So, that is what basically describes a panic attack, right? And when panic attacks happen repeatedly, that's when we diagnose a person with panic disorder.
Okay.
So, that is about panic disorder, and which is one type of anxiety disorder. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So on the follow-up on this answer, I can say that someone who feels anxiety probably has been thinking of something, maybe a regret in the past or some future implications that he has not been able to do, or something like, we have seen that people falling in bad loans and all, they overthink, and that may lead to anxiety disorder where they feel they are out of control. There's a sudden rush in the adrenaline, and also can it lead to a stroke?
Well, see, with anxiety, what happens is, as you said, that anxiety can happen because of multiple reasons, right? Now, if let's say the person has had a lost job, or the person has experienced a layoff, so naturally the person is bound to experience anxiety. That okay, how will I, how will I get a job? Now, let's say during this COVID situation, there are many people who are being laid off, right? Now, it is a
Yes.
real anxiety. People are worried about losing their job. Now, this isn't an unreal anxiety because the situation is real. It is bound to make a person feel worried. Now, the
Yes.
thing is, now when the person is experiencing worry, after a certain point of time, the person needs to take an action, right? So the action is that, okay, I need to, now that I know that I have been laid off and I'm sad and I'm worried, I need to take an action by trying to search for jobs. Now, a person having anxiety disorder, what happens is they are unable to take that action because they get trapped in that negative loop where they keep overthinking about that, that I've lost my job and I'm never going to get a job, right? So, what happens is they tend to catastrophize the situation. People having anxiety disorder, they tend to blow up the possibilities in the mind, that something I will never get a job, and that things will become way more worse than it is now. So they end up, blowing up all these possibilities in the mind, and it definitely causes a lot of anxiety and worry in them. So they keep overthinking, which will not be there in a person who is not suffering from anxiety disorder, right? Now, the other part that you mentioned, that does it cause stroke? Now, will not cause stroke, but definitely increases the risk of having stroke in future if a person is basically suffering from anxiety disorder and it is left untreated. So it basically increases the risk factor, Siddharth.
Okay. So I guess this is very perfectly explained by Anuradha. So since we have got to know the basic terms, let's understand why does it happen. As you know, it can be from a situation which can put you down, or some biological factors which can create the chemical and also the hormonal imbalances. So Anuradha, can you have a deep analysis of the reasons of depressions?
Sure. So, to start with, if we try to understand any mental health condition, whether it is depression or anxiety or any other disorder, right? There is a particular way how we can understand it, as in why does it happen. So there is this particular perspective called the biopsychosocial theory. What is a biopsychosocial theory? The biopsychosocial theory basically talks about the fact that biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors together basically contribute into any mental health condition. So when we talk about, so if we talk about depression, so I'll start with explaining the biological perspective. Now, when we talk about biological perspective, basically we are talking about family history, genes, or let's say as in the genetic loading, the general medical conditions, or drugs, right? Now, in depression, what happens is the biological reasons for depression is that there are certain chemical messengers in the brain which we call the neurotransmitters, right? Now, in depression specifically, it has been found that serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, these are the three main neurotransmitters that have been found to have, these are the three neurotransmitters where we find an imbalance when a person is suffering from depression. Now, I will just tell you a bit, or tell all of you a bit of a brief about this. So, serotonin is one kind of neurotransmitter which basically, helps, it basically helps us to fall asleep. It has a role to play in eating, managing our aggressive behavior, sexual behavior, and also plays a significant role in controlling our mood. Similarly, dopamine is another very important neurotransmitter in depression, particularly, which basically controls our reward seeking behavior. So it gives us a sense of pleasure. dopamine. And the third neurotransmitter that I spoke about is norepinephrine or noradrenaline. So norepinephrine or noradrenaline basically helps our body to recognize and respond to any stressful situation. So if, so I so it's very common that when there is an imbalance in any of these three neurotransmitters in the brain, it is likely that the person is going to experience depression. These are one of the so this is the biological perspective of depression, that why people usually experience depression and what are the changes that happens in neurotransmitters in the brain. Coming to psychological perspective, right? Now, in psychological perspectives, certain things we talk about under psychological factors. The personality pattern or the personality type of the person is very important. What kind of coping styles the person usually has. The third is, let's say, the thinking style. We all have a unique style of thinking, right? So this style of thinking is another aspect which comes under psychological factors. And the other is cognitive appraisal. How do we evaluate or assess any situation or event? These are the psychological factors which basically, increases the vulnerability of a person to experience any mental health condition in future. So I'll explain quite a few here. For example, the style of thinking. Now, in depression, what happens is people with depression usually have a very pessimistic style of thinking. So they have a lot of negative thoughts. Now, what happens is in depression, particularly, that these negative thoughts, are mostly revolves around three important themes. One of the main negative thought in depression is that where the person believes that the person is inadequate. So most of the people who suffer from depression, one of the main negative thought or belief about themselves is I am inadequate, from which basically the person ends up feeling worthless. The second kind of a belief is that where the person perceives the future to be completely hopeless. And the other thing is that the person experiences that the situation is something where the person experiences a lot of helplessness. So worthless, hopeless, and helpless are the three probably themes that are very, very dominant in a person who is suffering from depression. Now, if the style of thinking is negative, right, what happens is whenever something happens, the tendency of the person will be to misinterpret the situation in a negative way. And naturally, what happens is they probably end up seeing things in a much more worse way, right? So they possibly see things much more worse than they really are because of this negative style of thinking. So that is one that so style of thinking, I think, is something that very much contributes into how we probably, perceive a situation. The other thing, as I was talking about, is the cognitive appraisal. Now, what do I mean by cognitive appraisal? Cognitive appraisal is basically how we evaluate and assess any particular event or situation, right? So whenever we experience any situation, we make a meaning out of that situation, right? We interpret the situation. Now, when we interpret the situation, we can either interpret the situation in a negative way or a positive way. Depending upon our interpretation of the situation, we will accordingly experience the emotion. For example, let's say this evaluation or appraisal can be of two types. One is primary evaluation or appraisal, and the second is secondary evaluation or appraisal. I'll explain both. Primary evaluation or primary appraisal is nothing but subjective evaluation of the situation, right? How the situation is actually. Secondary evaluation is nothing but my evaluation or evaluation of my ability to cope with that situation. I'll give a small example here. For example, let's say I have gone for a job interview and I'm waiting in the lobby for my name to be called. Now, suddenly I notice that, people are all dressed properly. And suddenly I start noticing that I am dressed very sloppily in comparison to the rest of the people. And immediately I start thinking that others are dressed so well and I think I am not dressed properly, and that might have an impact on my interview, right? So what is happening? this is my evaluation of the situation, that others are dressed properly, but and I'm not dressed properly, I'm dressed sloppily, and that might affect my interview process. Now when a person enters into the interview process with this kind of a frame of mind, naturally it starts hampering the interview process, because that thought constantly is there at the back of my mind, that how is the, how are the interviewers perceiving me. So that is the evaluation of the situation. And this is the primary evaluation that we usually do. The second type of evaluation in this example is the evaluation of one's ability to cope with the situation. Now, if I feel that I am sloppily dressed and I think I can't manage this, right? And I completely believe this, and I feel that, okay, I think, my interview is just screwed up. So naturally, that also further adds on to the anxiety, or the emotion. So appraisal of the situation also plays a significant role in any of the disorder, whether it is depression or anxiety. The last thing, social factors, and I think that's where, as you mentioned, the situational factors come in. So under social factors, things which happen is probably, let's say, things like, how is the living situation of the person, what's the financial condition of the person. Most important is what kind of support system the person has, which is very, very important in depression. So if there, so for example, situations like if the person has experienced a loss of job, or there has been a breakup in relationship, right, or death of a loved one, or any kind of trauma, right, can increase, social vulnerability of a person to experience depression later. So I think all these three factors, cumulatively have an, contribution into the development of depression.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Anuradha. So I recently read an article on Hindustan Times. Like it mentioned one survey conducted by Nimans, and it was mentioned that nearly 150 million Indians need active like medical health support, and only less than like 30 million people are seeking the support. So I wanted to ask you about the seriousness of the issue, also why there is very less talk about it. If we take the example of COVID-19, let's say, so
Hmm.
there are a lot of talks about like how do we secure ourselves physically, but there
Hmm.
is very less discussion on how do we secure ourselves mentally. So can you throw some light on this?
I think that's a very valid question, because, what happens is we forget one thing, that we forget is that the mind and the body is related, right? Now, we
Yes,
all know that when it is the body, we are very, very aware about that, how to take care of the body with exercise and, with proper diet, so that we are not being fat and things like that. But when it comes to the mind, we hardly take care of it. One of the reason is that, the issues with the mind, right, is something that we can't see. It can only be felt, right? So naturally, that is one thing. The other thing is that people are, yes, there are increasing awareness about mental health, currently, but still, I think we have a long way to go. There is a lot of stigma associated with mental health issues still now.
correct.
For example, if, let's say, take the example of COVID-19. So somebody comes and tells me that, that I'm really worried about losing my job, right? And I tell the
Yes,
person that, you shouldn't be worried. You have such a good job and you're doing so fine. Why are you worrying, right? So what I'm doing is I'm immediately invalidating the person, right? I'm not listening to the person. I'm not, giving that space to the person to really vent out. I am immediately telling the person, don't worry, right?
yes,
Usually, when a person says that, I'm sad, we immediately go there and try to give advice that, do this, do that. Why are you
correct,
feeling
correct,
sad? You need to be happy, right? Now, if you
correct,
see, all of you, that there is a lot of focus to be happy. If you look around, I feel that there is a competition. We are all running behind to be happy. So there is a lot of stress on positivity. Think positively, feel positive, right? Do
correct,
positive things. But the thing is, I understand as a mental health professional that it is important to be happy, but somewhere in this constant, where we are constantly emphasizing people to be happy, somewhere we are downplaying the importance of of the negative emotions, which are very much there, and it is very normal. just like happiness, feeling sad, feeling anxious, or feeling worried are just very common the way we feel happy. But if there is a constant pressure to be happy, immediately when we feel sad or when we feel worried, we immediately question, we doubt ourselves. I think there's something wrong about it, right? And we immediately think that, okay, why am I worried? Why am I having so many negative thoughts? Why am I feeling sad? I should not be feeling sad. Immediately, what we do is we try to distract ourselves, right? And now the thing is, any emotion, particularly unpleasant emotions, whether it is sadness or worry or anxiety, if it is halfway processed, that emotion usually comes up again and again. And it is an indication that maybe I have not listened to my emotions. I usually tell, my clients and everyone that every emotion has a message for us. They are not emotional messages, but they are emotion message. So if I'm feeling sad, can I really allow myself to feel sad? Can I acknowledge that yes, I'm feeling sad because something might have happened, right? Something might have happened which has really made me upset. And maybe my sadness is telling me that maybe I need to reach out and talk to a person. So it is very important that whenever someone is coming to us to talk about anything unpleasant, whether they tell us that, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling worried, rather than immediately giving the person advice that, you should not feel like this and you need to be happy, you need to be strong, we need to allow the person to share and ventilate, right? Because that's where the stigma will probably, be nullified. Because many a times we ask we have this thing that probably you should try more. I think if you should try more, you will be able to come out of this. But we need to understand one thing, that mental health condition, it is not about trying doesn't, it's not about that I will try and I can be happy suddenly if a person is depressed. There are a lot of other factors, and the person doesn't deliberately do it, right? So when we are
Obviously.
making, yeah, so when we are saying such things, we have to be a bit cautious about it, because we are telling the person that you need to take control of something about which they are out of control. It is not in their control. So I think we have to be a bit more sensitive when people come to us, and we need to educate ourselves. It's all about changing the attitude towards mental health.
Yes, I guess very well explained by Anuradha on the seriousness of this issue. That to summarize, just to say that opposite values are complementary. If there is happiness, there is bound to have sadness. The fact is that we need to accept it and deal with it in a matured way. And yes, of course, this issue seems to be really serious. To understand the situation in depth, let's understand how the hormones come into play. And as in the previous question, Anuradha has explained briefly about the three most popular hormones, the neurotransmitters, the serotonin, the dopamine, and the norepinephrine. So, can you explain me how do the imbalance of these three majorly play an important role in the mental state of us?
Right. So, see, serotonin and dopamine are two neurotransmitters. These are the chemical messengers in the brain. Hormones are the chemical messengers in the body, right? And they basically travel through the bloodstream. Now, what happens is, typically, whenever we experience any stressful situation, right? What immediately happens is, or any stressful situation or a threatening situation, immediately the brain is signaled that there is something dangerous or threatening there or stressful there, and you need to do something about it. Now, in order to do something about the situation, our body needs to prepare. Now, in order to prepare the body, what happens is, there is this adrenal gland that is there inside the body, right? So immediately the brain triggers the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland immediately secretes the norepinephrine or the noradrenaline. So basically, norepinephrine or noradrenaline is called hormone, as well as they are both hormones and neurotransmitters. So when we experience any kind of stress or any threatening situation, the adrenal glands are basically activated, and they secrete norepinephrine or the noradrenaline. Now what happens? The noradrenaline. Now what happens is, when this basically is released, the noradrenaline gets released in the bloodstream. It basically it gives fuel to the body, and the body basically gets prepared to fight or flight. Right now, what happens is, if a person has a tendency or has a proneness to experience anxiety repeatedly, what happens is there is this hormone called stress hormone. Right now, what when a person repeatedly experiences anxiety, the stress hormone, which is usually called the cortisol, it remains in the blood level for a long time. So cortisol is a stress hormone which does get released when we experience stress, right? And this hormone is important to basically fight with the situation. It helps to reduce the stress level. But if a person who is experiencing anxiety repeatedly, the cortisol tends to remain in the bloodstream for a longer time, and that's when it starts damaging the body. So increased amount of cortisol has been found to be there in people suffering from anxiety, and high levels of high levels of cortisol basically. Another important thing is, I think, as I mentioned, that usually if we know that there are two kinds of hormones in women. One is estrogen and progesterone. Now, usually what happens is before, let's say, before menstruation, usually women, what happens is the estrogen level falls down, particularly after the ovulation. So the estrogen level falls down and the progesterone level goes up. Now, estrogen is a hormone which basically regulates, has a significant role to play in our mood, and so does the progesterone level. But just before the menstruation and after the ovulation, what happens is these two hormones, there is an imbalance in these two hormones, and due to which usually women experience physical symptoms like bloating, headaches, and emotional symptoms like they experience low mood and irritability. And this exactly is commonly known as premenstrual syndrome, right? PMS, that we often, that's how we know it. Now, what happens is basically now when PMS can turn into premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So basically, severe forms of PMS is termed as premenstrual dysphoric disorder, where it has been found that 3 to 9% of women experiences premenstrual dysphoric disorder, right? During which,
Yes.
and in particularly during, if it is PMDD, right? If it is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, the person is no longer, the women no longer experiences simply low mood, right? It leads to depression along with the other symptoms that I have already mentioned. So in PMDD, the emotional symptoms basically overshadow the physical symptoms. And during that time, it is very important to reach out and seek help from a mental health professional. So that's very important. So these two hormones also again play a very significant role in our, mental health. Even in men, testosterone is the hormone in men, and it has been research is showing that low levels of testosterone is associated with low mood, irritability, and poor concentration. And it's been found that with age, usually testosterone levels decrease in men. So these symptoms can also be found in older men. So basically, I think that's how hormones does have a significant role to play in different mental health conditions.
So now that we understood how it happens and how the hormones are responsible for it, so let's just drive into another lane. Like, how do we deal with it, right? So, usually, people who are close to a particular person don't even realize that the person is going through a tough time or is going through a depression, right? We think
Hmm.
everything is going good, but it might not. So
Hmm.
my question is like, how do we know? Like, what are the signs of depression? And often, like, we sometimes figure out that a person is going through depression, right? Sometimes we figure it out, but then we don't know the steps to take further. Like, we keep
Hmm.
on asking them what's the problem, ask them to open up and share what's bothering them, but that might also go otherwise, right? A lot of times. So instead of helping, we sometimes make it worse for them. So
Hmm.
my question would be, like, what are the signs of depression? And if we figure out that someone is going through depression, then what should we do and what should we not do? Like, what not to do to trigger a person suffering from depression, and what exactly we should do as a friend.
Right. So, particularly, I think, as I was talking about, initially about depression, that the major symptoms of depression is where a person experiences low mood for minimum of weeks, along with low mood or sadness, and it is persistent. It's not that I experience sadness for one day and then it's just gone. So it is persistent, it is continuing, it is not temporary. And usually this low mood persists for a minimum of 2 weeks, right? Along with this low mood, certain other significant symptoms which will help us to know that the person is suffering from depression is a loss of interest in previous pleasurable activities. You will gradually find people suffering from depression to withdraw socially. They will stop interacting with people. They will probably no longer engage in any activities which they used to enjoy previously. Let's say I used to really enjoy watching TV or playing badminton. A person suffering will probably stop engaging in such activities because it no longer gives them the pleasure that they used to get once. That is another very important marker in depression, right? The next thing is the person's sleep gets affected, appetite gets affected. There is a lot of fatigue in the person. So the person, many people suffering from depression, they find it extremely hard to come out of the bed, right? Many times we tell the person that try to wake up in the morning, just engage in a bit of a jogging. But the thing is, it is really difficult for them to come out of the bed, right? Another important marker is that usually people suffering from depression experiences a lot of guilt, and they experience a lot of guilt, and they blame themselves, right? So that is another important marker in depression. And they also have a lot of concentration difficulties. They are unable to concentrate in their work, and they blame themselves. They feel worthless. They often you might come across people suffering from depression. They say that that they are inadequate, they can't manage, right? There's nothing good happening in their life. Everything seems to be very dull and hopeless, right? So you will find a lot of hopelessness, as if the person has lost hope and meaning in life. That is very, very important. Usually when people suffering from depression, in their conversation, you can get traces of this, where the person talks about that they no longer feel find any meaning in life. They have lost the meaning. Now usually depression has various levels too, depending upon the intensity of the symptoms. So there can be mild, moderate, and severe forms of depression. Usually suicidal thoughts are found in moderate to severe levels of depression, and often along with that, often suicidal attempts. So it starts with suicidal thought, where the person feels like bringing an end to their life, and finally they end up probably believing that life is no longer worth living, and they attempt suicide, right? Now, something about suicide that I would, since we are talking about it, I would like to say that many times we become very judgmental, or we just say that suicide is a someone who attempts suicide is a coward, or it is not okay, it's a selfish act on the part of the person. But something I think we all need to know, that a person, nobody wants to kill himself or herself, right? A person in suicidal thoughts or attempting suicide is an indication that the person probably experiences that there is no other option left in the person's life, right? So it is a human response where the person experiences that there is no other option left, and the only option left is to kill self, which will bring an end to the immense pain, the debilitating pain that they are experiencing, right? So
Okay.
I think these are the major symptoms in depression that that we can basically see in people. Now, as you mentioned, I think that how will we identify it? Now, these are the probable symptoms. Now, few other markers for friends and family members to identify is that usually people suffering from depression, they usually start socially withdrawing. So if you find your friend who has been otherwise used to be a happy go lucky person, or used to even probably, even if not very outgoing, but used to take part, participate in conversations, you suddenly find the person withdrawing, you know stops interacting, stops participating in any kind of activities or conversations, right? Tends to avoid your calls, and you suddenly see this change. this is one marker where you might think that, okay, there must be something wrong with this person, right? The second is when you also see that the person is probably suddenly talking about life and death, right? You never probably have found your friend talking about death, life, meaning, right? Meaninglessness in life, things like that. Another important marker in depression is, particularly in moderate to severe forms of depression, when the person starts, let's say, giving away things or writing letters or distributing the responsibilities, it is one of the indications, right, that the person is suffering from depression. I think, what was the second question?
The second question was like, what not to do to trigger a person suffering from depression? Like, what should we do so that we don't make it worse?
Right, right. Particularly in that part, what not to do, or what not to say to a person who is suffering from depression or any mental health condition. Particularly, few things that we need to avoid saying to a person is that, for example, we often end up saying that, it's all in your head and nothing will happen, right? Just snap out of it. Now, when we
Mhm.
make such comments that, it's all in your head, we are basically, trivializing the emotional symptoms, right, that the person has along with the physical symptoms. So the person might end up saying that, I feel tired, I don't feel like doing anything, I just feel like sleeping, right? But the thing is, now if we just say that, you just try to do exercise and, try to come out of it, snap out of it, we are basically missing that point, that basically the person is experiencing emotional symptoms. And when we say it is a kind of a dismissive statement, right? So people suffering from mental health condition, any kind of mental health condition, whether it is depression, anxiety, or anything, it is not really easy for a person to snap out of it, as we say, because there isn't any switch that we will just, click and the person will come out of it. It takes time for a person to really recover, right, from the mental
Mhm.
health condition. That's one thing. So we really have to be very cautious about the kind of words or what we are telling the person. The
Exactly.
other thing is, yeah, so the other thing is, probably, when we end up saying that, even I had depression last year, and for a few days, and I just, I just tried to feel positive, spoke to people, and I was okay. Now, you might have, we might have experienced mood swings in the past. Now, it is okay to share, but important thing is that mood swings is not equivalent to having a mental illness, right? So if someone is really telling you that, they are experiencing sadness or they are not feeling good, if we just say that, it's normal, and it is okay, even I had, felt like this previously, that basically we are saying that it is normal whatever you are feeling, and it is you don't have to seek any treatment or help because it is normal, right?
Okay.
So we can definitely share our, our journey or struggle, but later. Another important thing is probably, as I already discussed about it, telling the person to be positive constantly,
Mhm.
right? That is something I think I already explained, that why it is not okay to constantly tell the person to be positive. Because when you
Yeah.
say the person that you need to be positive, the person gets a message that whatever I'm feeling is bad and I'm not supposed to feel this way, right? So that's where the person doesn't acknowledge that sadness is an emotion, and it is okay at times to not feel okay, and it is okay to talk about it.
Got it. Yeah.
Mm. Yes, I guess that's a quite a meticulous as well as a brave answer from your side, Anuradha. So, since we have understood this, let's go ahead to understand the treatment of this vast problem. Of course, medications are there, yet vast studies have proved that medications, along with mindfulness meditations, the most popularly used therapy, optimize the healing process, as we know. And also, there are counseling, physical activities that you can do, and taking therapy sessions. They really do help.
Mm.
So, Anuradha, can you throw some light on the available treatment process on a broad perspective, as well as along the side, how much does financially they cost? Like there is a precursor thing in our mind, like if I go ahead for a counseling session or a therapy, how much does it going to cost me, so that our listeners can understand and be comfortable with it.
Right, right. So I think with the treatment part, we first need to understand, because initially when we started the discussion, I think I explained about the biopsychosocial theory, right? That if we need to understand any mental health condition, we need to understand that it has a biological contribution, psychological contribution, and a social contribution. Now, with biological factors, that is something that can't be probably addressed through therapy or counseling. If there is a biological role there, then medication is very, very important, right? So medication does play a significant role to address the biological factors. That's one thing. Now now for depression there are antidepressants. For anxiety there are different kinds of anti-anxiety that are present, right? Many times what happens is, I do understand that people are afraid, right, that they don't want to take medication because they feel that they will become dependent on it, right, that they will not be able to function without medication in future. Now I do understand that that concern is very valid, but I also would like to tell all of you out there is that, as I said, that there are levels of like as I said, that there are levels of depression, as in there is mild, moderate, severe. Usually in mild depression medication is not much required, but in moderate to severe levels we do request clients to go and seek psychiatric consultation, because if we do not take medication, right, in such cases, then only going for therapy will not be helpful, because the chemical imbalance that has happened in the brain, that is something that only medication take control of, right? So medication does play a very significant role in any mental health condition. Coming to the other forms of treatment, yes, mindfulness is something that has been extremely found to be very helpful in anxiety, in depression, right? That's something that's people are talking about, and there are innumerable studies on mindfulness. The other kind of treatment, I think, physical exercise or any kind of exercise is very important in relieving depression or anxiety, is because there is a scientific reason. Because engage in exercise, right, basically what happens is it releases some happy hormones inside the body, right, and that is basically which uplifts the mood. So that's why usually in anxiety or in depression we request clients to engage in some sort of simple exercises to begin with, right, because when we start engaging in some sort of physical activity, it starts inducing, because there are changes in the body happening internally, and it releases hormones, right, which are responsible to make us feel happy, feel good. So when we start exercising bit by bit, now I do understand initially it is very difficult for a person to even start doing such things, engaging in exercise, but if we try initially, taking small steps at a time, you will be able to see that there are gradual changes in the mood. So physical exercise, then mindfulness, then medication have an important role to play. Coming to therapy or counseling, right? Now it is very important that, as I said, that there are psychological factors, social factors of as well, right? So the style of thinking, how we interpret a situation, as I said about style of thinking, the pessimistic style of thinking, right? So many people are prone to view things always in a negative way. They have a tendency to catastrophize the situation, right? So let's say I have failed an exam, and from there I come to this conclusion that no matter whichever exam I give in future, I will always fail, right? So neither I'm catastrophizing the situation, but I'm also overgeneralizing, right, without much data. Now this is a style of thinking maybe I have had, and this is where therapy comes in, because therapy here really helps to address where the problem has started, why, how it has started, right? Why is there a style of, why the person has developed a pessimistic style of thinking, and how to unlearn any unhelpful or maladaptive behavior, right? So in therapy, we try to help the person to identify what is the source of the problem, where is the source, and try to identify what are the unhelpful or maladaptive learning patterns that the person has had in order to deal with, any kind of difficult situations. And in therapy, we gradually help the person to unlearn those maladaptive learning patterns and substitute them with more healthier patterns of behavior. So that's how probably, so I think I've explained very briefly what we do in therapy, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Yes.
that's where therapy comes in and helps to helps the person to restructure their style of thinking, restructure their way of perceiving the world, perceiving themselves, which naturally then helps in, which brings in a difference in the way they experience emotions.
So, Anuradha, I wanted to know that recently have you noticed anything common in your clients? Like, obviously, it's a very like subjective issue, but have you noticed any patterns? It can be like generation specific or any region specific.
Yes, yes. So one of the thing, I think that's a very good question. One of the things that I have identified, in the young population, particularly between the age range of 20 to 30, particularly between 20 to 25 or 28, let's say, right? One of the things that I have found in this population, right, is that they tend to compare themselves a lot with others, right? If there is a small failure or they fail to achieve something which they had expected from themselves, right?
Correct.
Immediately they experience, low mood. They perceive themselves to be completely. They view themselves to be as failures, right? And they feel that their career and their future is doomed, right? And now I have also, now when I further explore, I have usually found a pattern as in one of the important factor which makes them feel very low about themselves or very less about themselves is that comparison, right? Usually I have often found people comparing themselves with others. Usually they compare themselves with the contemporaries and they say that, okay, my friend has been promoted, right? Both of us were studying in the same college, we had the same degree, but he or she has been promoted and look at me, where am I, right? Immediately we start devaluing and belittling ourselves. So
Correct.
comparison, and research is also saying that comparison is one of the process which always makes a person feel less than. It can never make a person feel motivated, right? So comparison always highlights the fact what I don't have. So naturally, if this is something that's constantly being highlighted, what I don't have, naturally I will feel bad. And naturally I will always feel that I'm lagging behind and I need to compete with the other person. So
Correct.
comparison is something that I have found tremendously, like in most of the people that they engage in, which results in low self-esteem, low self-confidence, which is also found significantly in people suffering from depression, right? And just to add one thing there, that comparison is something which is not only very instinctual in people. We all compare, I know, right? But if we are not very aware about how does comparison affect us, and if we are not very mindful about the fact that if we get into the trap of comparison, it can really make us feel extremely bad about ourselves. And comparison has often been found to be coming from childhood, because comparison is
Correct.
something that we all learned, right? When we were born, we never learned to compare ourselves, right? But the thing is, the kind of experiences that any person has, particularly in their childhood, has a significant role to play in the way the person, starts viewing themselves, starts viewing the world around them and the people around them. So if a child has constantly been criticized or blamed for his or her failure, right? So let's say, for example, a child comes in, with the report card and shows me, and where I found that maybe in maths the child has scored poorly. Now immediately, let's say I ask the child, what's the highest marks in the class, right? We often ask
Correct.
that as parents, right? Now I do understand, it's the parents do not have a wrong intention, they really want to motivate their child, but it is very important as parents to understand what are we communicating to the child. The moment I ask the child what's the highest marks in the class, who has got what marks, we are giving a message to the child that I'm more interested in knowing the highest marks. The second thing
Correct.
is, when I tell the child that how can you get such low marks in maths, right? I have given so many good tutors, and you are going to such a good school, right? I think that's very bad. And we start blaming and criticizing the child. Now, when we do that, what we are actually telling the child is that failure is bad, and you are not allowed to get low marks. You should always come out with flying colors, and you should always be successful. So what happens is, Rather than, basically by this we are trying to tell the child that you need to work hard. But rather than saying that I understand you are sad and you are not happy about your marks, right, in maths, let me know how can I help you. Can we sit together and try to see what might have gone wrong? Rather than this approach, we end up saying the child, we criticize the child and blame the child for securing less marks in one of the subjects. Now, when we do that repeatedly to a child, the child gets a message that failure is bad, right? And that the child is not supposed to fail. Something that I probably missed saying previously is that the brain works on the basis of forming associations. So I associate that failure is bad because that's what have been told to me. That's how people have responded to me when I fail. So the person grows up with this belief in the mind that failure is bad and I should always be successful. And based on that belief, a person ends up having certain, guiding principle. One of the principle can be that, I need to always work hard. I should always be successful because only when I will be successful, people will like me. So imagine a person constantly trying to work hard and constantly trying to be successful. Now, I'm not saying that being ambitious is bad or that you should not, aim higher. But if it is loaded with this constant pressure to always be successful, which is humanly not possible, right? It is not possible to always be
Exactly.
successful. So if that is the belief that is there in my mind that I can't afford to fail, imagine the amount of pressure that the person experiences. And on top of that, if I have been compared as a child with my siblings or with my friends by my teacher or by my parents, then the person also, learns this approach as well. That in order to evaluate myself where I stand, right, I always need to look at others. I need to use someone as a benchmark of success. So that's a very important thing that is something that needs to be aware of.
Yes, Anuradha. So very perfectly put up the question of Vishwajit. Now we want to come with an important question. So we have come across people and popularly portrayed, especially in movies, that depressed person become habituated with alcohol and cigarettes. Slowly, people become addicted to the sedative effects of these substances. So Anuradha, how does these intoxications affect our brain and hamper the depressed person?
Right. So I think now with the intoxication part, so what happens is that when a person engages in smoking, right? So when a person engages in smoking, we all know that there is a substance called nicotine in tobacco, right? Now what happens is when a person engages in smoking repeatedly, the nicotine level in the bloodstream rises. And nicotine is a substance which basically triggers the reward centers in the brain, which releases dopamine. As I told earlier, dopamine is one type of neurotransmitter which gives pleasure. It is associated with reward-seeking behavior. So when we experience any sort of pleasure, dopamine is being released in the brain, right? So naturally, when nicotine is a substance which triggers dopamine release in the brain. So when a person engages in smoking, it basically makes the person really feel good, right? So naturally, the brain starts associating nicotine with feeling good. As I told, that brain usually works on association. That's how the association forms between nicotine and feeling good. And once this happens, so when a person, let's say, when the person becomes addicted to smoking and wants to stop smoking, what happens is when the person stops smoking, there is less nicotine in the bloodstream, right? But what has happened is because of continued use, there is a certain amount of nicotine that is there in the bloodstream, and my body has become habituated to have that level of nicotine. Naturally, when I'm not smoking, the nicotine level drops in the bloodstream. And naturally, so the pleasure response is completely cut off. And this causes a lot of withdrawal symptoms, right? As we know, it causes more craving for cigarette, it causes anxiety, it causes depression, it causes irritability, frustration increases, and also anger outbursts is there in the person. Now, something to reflect on is that many people engage in smoking. Now we need to identify what is the purpose of the person smoking here. Some people smoke occasionally, some people smoke just when they are with friends, right? Social smoker. But let's say many a times people also smoke when they are feeling very upset or they are stressed about something. Why people engage in smoking is because when they are stressed, as I said, that when they smoke, the nicotine triggers dopamine release in the brain, right? And naturally, it helps to reduce the anxiety. It makes us feel good. That is why, people, when this happens, the person, basically there is a message that goes to the brain that, see, when you smoked, you felt good, right? So next time when you are stressed, the person will feel more prone to engage in smoking, because last time when he or she felt stressed, smoking helped him to feel better, right? So basically, the brain receptors become conditioned to expect nicotine in certain situations. So when in the next time when I'm stressed, the brain will give me a signal that, you need to smoke, because previously when you smoke, you felt better. So we again end up smoking, and that's how we end up smoking repeatedly, and that's how the habit gets formed, right? But what happens is, the issue basically is not resolved. Smoking or this or cigarette smoking, doesn't help much in depression. It only gives temporary relief, but it is not a permanent solution. Similarly, when we talk about alcohol intoxication, right? In research is showing that people usually use alcohol to self-medicate the symptoms of depression. Now I'll tell you how. Alcohol is basically a depressant, right? As we all know, it is a depressant and it has sedative effect, right? So when we consume alcohol, it helps us to distract ourselves from the persistent feelings of sadness, right? So it reduces anxiety and lowers the inhibitions level. But what happens and hence, when a person is feeling depressed, they end up, they are more prone to use alcohol in a way to manage their sadness. But what happens in the long run is, now when the person ends up taking alcohol repeatedly, again there are chances of addiction. And when that happens, we all know that if a person who is suffering from alcohol addiction, it also has a lot of impacts on various aspects of life. Like, let's say, the career is hampered, financial aspect of the person, financial part of the person also gets hampered. Now all these things also further worsens the depressive symptoms, which in turn again makes the person more prone to abuse alcohol. So if you see, it's a vicious cycle, right? So alcohol intoxication,
Yes.
although is giving temporary relief, but it worsens the situation, right? It worsens the depressive symptoms, which the person doesn't understand in the long run. So intoxication, whether it is alcohol and particularly smoke, doesn't give any solution, or the damage is more. The person does experience temporary relief, but the damage is more in the long run.
Yes, I guess. So Anuradha, I guess we have almost completed the all the questions that we had for you. So anything that you think we have missed asking you as a certain important question that we should have asked, or anything that you have missed while answering them? And
Right. So I think I did probably miss answering one question, which I now realize. I think the financial part. I think the part, right. So where you guys asked me that, what is it like? What's the cost? I think that was one of the questions, right?
yes, yes.
Right. So see, the thing is, when it comes to the cost, right? Yes, I do understand that. See, physical health, we get insurance, right? But mental health in India is probably, doesn't come under, insurance and things like that, right? Which is there in the Western countries. But the thing is, it is important to understand that, it is not that it is very expensive. Now it differs. It does differ from clinic to clinic, right? But it is more or less, there are clinics which offer therapy where it is per session is less than 1,000, right? In some clinics it is more than 1,000. Now it is a choice of the person. Whichever is convenient and affordable for the person can go along and get help. But I would always say that, it's very important to seek help and reach out to mental health professionals, because the more we don't take care of our mental health, right, it will also start affecting the body. So we think that only, we spend a lot of money in our on our physical health, right? We do, I think we all, most of us, after a certain age, we go for the health checkup, right? Full body health checkup. We do that, right? Now, we are very much well aware of, if we don't do that, there will be future complications. Similarly, therapy or, talking to a mental health professional is equally important. Now, I always say that it is not, you don't have to have a clinical diagnosis to talk to any mental health professional. It is not that only if you have clinical depression or if you have clinical anxiety that you need to seek help. It is okay, even if you're not having a good day and you're not able to manage certain things in life, you're not able to balance, it is absolutely fine to talk to someone, right? It is talk to a mental health professional, because a mental health professional knows how to basically help you navigate in that difficult time. You can always reach out to your friends and family, but if you feel that after a certain point of time you're not getting the right kind of help, a mental health professional is the one whom you should go to, because therapy is not about just giving advices, it is not about giving opinions, right? So there are different ways, there is a lot of process that goes into therapy, and I feel it is very important for, I think it's important for all of us, once in a while we should go and explore selves and know about us and things like that in therapy. That does help a lot.
So I guess we are done with all our questions and answering session, and we would thank you, Anuradha, for joining us. As Sighly Hober, anything you want to, as on an appreciation note or anything,
Oh,
would be grateful to hear something about us.
sure. So I think I was looking for this kind of a platform, and then this happened, right? I'm really thankful to all three of you, right, for giving me this opportunity and platform to talk about mental health and to spread the awareness and impart some of the share some of the knowledge or information that I have with all of you. And I think the questions that you guys framed have been very, very apt, right? I feel that it covered most of the things. Like there are a lot to discuss about, but I think in this such short span of time, I think the questions were very appropriate and to the point. So once again, I would really like to thank all of you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you, Anuradha.
Thank you.
Okay, Sambit, as you know, we took some of the questions as a part of social media survey from our listeners. So from those questions, I want to ask you first that someone had asked ki how do we stay away from toxic people? So can you just answer this like from your experience?
Okay. Um, it's a very complicated thing, but the understanding it is very simple, because to be honest, we all have toxic qualities among us. Everyone that you see, we all have bad qualities. Normally what happens is when two persons meet, initially they tend to show their best part, but slowly when they become closer and closer, they tend to show their bad habits, negative vibes, and those toxic qualities. So there is nothing called as a perfect relationship, whatever relationship you want between those two persons. What I want to emphasize here is that since we all have the toxic qualities, it does not matter how much toxic quality that person has. It matters, are we ready to deal with those toxic qualities of that person? Because it means that if you are ready to deal with the toxic qualities of the person, it means that that person means a lot to us, and those toxic qualities of that person is not bothering us, and we can live in a harmony together. Because similarly the other person might be tolerating our toxic qualities. It's all in the acceptance. And why I want to emphasize in realizing this, because you want to stick together to that person, or you want to go out, move out of the kind of relationship that you have with the person. So both the things require an action, and action comes from a realization. So the sooner you realize that are you ready to accept the toxicity of the person, then you're going to take the required action accordingly. But the moment you realize that yes, the toxicity is going beyond par, which you cannot take it, which you cannot tolerate, the things are not meant for you, then it's better to walk away. But you have to be very sure of it, are you ready or are you not? I guess that's my point of view.
Thank you, Sambit. I guess that answers the questions perfectly. So yeah, coming back to the next question, someone asked if it's morally correct to blame someone for their unavailability during a time of crisis. So how do you answer that?
Okay.
Sambit?
So it seems like, there can be a lot of interpretations to this question. Suppose there is an inavailability of a person. We have to look into different aspects of it, like why the person is unavailable at that point of your crisis. There can be two things. First, the person is really busy in something. He had genuine reasons to not to be there. So in that scenario, I would suggest you that, don't find faults behind others mistake, because you don't know what the person is going through, the other part of the story you don't know. So if it has not been intentional, then I guess, of course, you don't have to find a fault in their mistakes. But the other part, when you realize that the person is not available at the point of your crisis knowingly, it is intentional. So it means that that person's priorities are different. To be there with you in your point of your crisis is not on the priority list of that person. So the person chose to avoid it and walk away. So by accepting the person's point of view, that that person's thinking is that you do not matter so much, because from that point of view of acceptance, you can take further steps from your side, instead of pondering over what the person actually said, or what the person reacted to me, or how he reacted. So it all comes to the realization after you know what the truth has been. You have to know whether it was intentional or unintentional, because everyone's time perspective is different, the way of dealing things is different. So you have to take into look into it, and if you realize it's intentional, then you have to stop expecting, because expectations in the end, as we know, always leads us to hurt ourselves. So once you realize that the person's priority is different, so stop expecting from that person and you find your own way out. That's it from my side.
Absolutely, Sambit. That's actually a very practical answer that we can find for these questions. Thank you so much.
So yes, we have almost come to the end of this discussion, and I hope this discussion has been insightful to those who have listened this far. Anyone from our listeners list who want to consult professional help, I'm attaching Anuradha Palit's, the specialist in the guest in our source, uh, her email ID in the description, which is priyankakolkata2012@gmail.com. You'll be finding it in the description. So you can reach out to her for further consultation, and it would really be helpful. So that's what from our side, and so I hope this discussion finds a solution for you to deal with your insecurities and vulnerabilities, and you come out from them flourishingly, bring a lot of smile to this world. So at the end, I would like to say that yes, again, stay tuned and stay high. So भाई माने जय जगन्नाथ, नमस्कार, जय हिंद.